All right, I am hanging out with Amy Bennett, the Chief of Staff with Lightspeed Systems. Lightspeed, a proud sponsor of the K-12 Tech Talk podcast, and you've been with us with Midwest Tech Talk and K-12 Tech Pro. Amy, how are you?
I am great. I'm excited to be here on the podcast for my first time, Chris.
I would say we do a lot of emails back and forth, or we have over the years. And then just recently, we were doing a quick little email exchange about screen time stuff. So excited to see your face, to see you not in person, but to see you over the air. I guess summer is busy at Lightspeed.
Really, every time is busy just for a different reason. I've been at Lightspeed for like 17 years. So I stopped saying it'll get calmer when X because
Yes.
there's always the next thing. It's back to school and then it's the end of the calendar year and then it's testing and then it's the end of the school year. It's always something. I'm sure you know that
Yep.
better than anybody.
Yeah, we always laugh end of year, and everybody's like, "Oh, you're gonna enjoy your summer," and I do enjoy summer. But that's when the fun stuff happens. The new budget kicks in. We get to buy things.
Yep.
It's usually the more technical things that we get to do over June, July, into mid August. Not so much dealing with you know printers jamming, and teachers saying that XYZ is not working, kind of stuff. So a change of pace. It's a good change of pace.
That's right.
All right, so we want to talk about screen time uh, today. It's become, this major national conversation. Lots of bills floating around, and some have been passed into law about student screen time. I know Lightspeed has a solution that can help with monitoring of that, but we just want to talk bigger picture uh,
Yep.
about screen time in general. So, why do you think, Amy? Why is this issue becoming a thing now in 2026?
Yeah, it's really interesting, Chris, because we've had, screen time data and like been a small element of the products for a long time, but it has reached a fevered pitch this year. And I think that a lot of it is because whether we're talking about people working in schools or we're talking about parents, you look at students and there probably is a screen time technology overuse problem. I think that uh, it leads to mental health concerns, it leads to social media concerns, all of these things that are really real. What I think has happened, though, is we have conflated personal or consumer consumption with district device and instructional screen time. And, I think that the concerns about screen time are legitimate. One of the things I'm talking about all over is the gap between those concerns and some of the realities that we see in school districts.
Yeah, so when a lawmaker talks about screen time, um, I guess that's the question. How do you think they're defining it, and do you think they're defining it correctly?
Yeah, I guess when we're seeing so much legislation come out about this, and they are talking about school district device screen time. So they're not conflate. I think the concerns come from personal devices, but in the legislation, they're not conflating the two. But what I have seen most legislation really ignore is this idea that there's different types of screen time. There is active
Yes.
versus passive, there's instructional versus recreational, supervised, unsupervised, creation, consumption. And those are nuances that are really hard to legislate. So I think that what we're seeing in bills across the country is really ignoring that idea that not all screen exposure has the same impact, educational or developmental or social.
Yeah, we've had some conversations about a lot of these things are saying like 25 minutes for elementary students. I think I've read some about like 45 minutes. Um, and some of those questions are around where do we get the number 25 from? How do we come up with 45? Like, what's the data that backs that up? And then interesting in Missouri, a lot of our online tests that our state gives us take more than 25 minutes. Um, so then there has to be extra sentences written where they're seeing like, okay, well, in this case, it makes sense for more than 25 minutes. And I think that's what you're talking about. We can't just lump this problem in as one standard thing. Uh, there will be exceptions to the rule. And then we could banter too. I can go over to my elementary and say it's 25 minutes. If I talk to most all my teachers, they're already doing that without
Mm.
someone telling me that 25 minutes is the time. Our folks have already figured out they don't need a bill, they don't need a law, they don't need someone telling them because they're already doing what is correct.
Yeah, you're so right, Chris. And that is the thing when the legislation or the guidance comes out with these specific quotas. On the one hand, whoa, there's going to have to be so many exceptions. As you mentioned, testing time or students with IEPs, or you're thinking about homework and when do you really want to limit students on that? Or this is, a snow day and students are working from home, whatever those different things are, the exceptions to manage for someone in your role and all the people like you, like that becomes crazy. But the reality is that the actual amount of screen time that students are getting on their district devices in school is really reasonable from everything we see. Like you just said, what we see is elementary, the national average 35 minutes. It peaks in middle school at 57 minutes. I think that, as I mentioned in the beginning, this gap, if you ask parents what they think, they guess 4 hours out of a school day on screens.
Yes.
And the reality is just so different than that.
Yeah. So do you think I guess that's a follow-up then of the 30 something minutes or the 50 something minutes, how much negative stuff is in there that you think a parent or a lawmaker would be like, yeah, we should cut that out? Do you see a lot of that in what Lightspeed's finding?
Well, you know that schools are already doing so much with content filtering, which is required, with classroom management, with YouTube controls, with so many things that bad sites are really already blocked. And it
Mhm.
comes down to nuances of what is good versus bad screen time to make that decision. YouTube is one of the things that comes up a lot. And it's one of the things that has me the most fired up here because there was an article in the Wall Street Journal a couple of weeks ago that the headline was YouTube has taken over the American classroom. And it told stories of one student who watches 700 videos in a month, or like these edge cases like that. What our data shows is in elementary school, the average YouTube consumption is 1 minute per day. 1 minute per day in elementary school, peaking in high school at 5.7. So parents are worried about these edge cases. The media is latching on to these edge cases, but the reality is really so different than that because you're already blocking the distracting or inappropriate YouTube content that students would want to watch 700 of in a row
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah, and I mean, sticking with YouTube too, um, even those that consume a lot of YouTube, a lot of that might be background noise, some music that they're listening
Hmm.
to while they're doing an assignment. Um, some of that's not even completely fair to have a debate about. It's not necessarily a kid staring at a YouTube video. And again, I to say that that stuff doesn't happen, I won't say it doesn't happen. Um, but I think if you take a good look, uh, like you're saying, it's not the problem that we think it is. Or if it is, that's not necessarily screen time as much as that is the content.
Right.
We could be having this conversation just talking about our content filter, and that's classroom management. That's a principal talking to a teacher about, hey, don't let your kids get on YouTube. That's a tech department putting in better content rules that restrict YouTube access. That's turning off YouTube for elementary kids in your Google Admin Console. That
Hmm.
has nothing to do with just the screen time debate as that big picture thing. So do you think YouTube is
Exactly.
probably the biggest thing that's off with these screen time bills?
I I think that The personal cell phone bans, they probably were the precursor to this. The social media bans, they're really related to that too. But I would say most districts are banning social media on district devices anyway. They have most of that blocked for various reasons. So I think that YouTube comes under scrutiny. I think that you're seeing headlines. I think you were talking about it on the pod a couple of weeks ago, certain instructional tools that it's like students are spending too much time in that. Some of those come under scrutiny too. But the way I see it is just like you said, this becomes part of what districts are doing anyway. We're looking at the data. We're looking at app usage. We're finding out if it's having instructional impact. We're like measuring those things and then adjusting policies, locking down more content filtering or renewing or not renewing apps because of all of that. So I think that like YouTube, it was, I think iReady or something like that recently was in headlines, and it's taking a couple of specific instances and turning them into a national story or state legislation that feels a little blanket, probably.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I do wanna talk to you. I'll just the full transparency is in on this. You didn't come on here to talk about Lightspeed products so much. You asked, we were talking, you're like, "I would just love to talk about screen time big picture." But I know that Lightspeed has this good analytics tool. So would you go ahead and like, let's talk about that, but let's talk about what analytics a school can look at, that can help them make, to change this conversation some.
Yep. I think it's so important. And I've been at so many conferences recently talking about screen time. And I think that the way to close that gap between what people think is happening in schools and what is actually happening in schools when it comes to screen time is one thing, data. Second thing, more transparency and communication about all the things that you're doing to vet apps and look at analytics and filter the environment and reduce distractions, all of that. So, what it's our analytics tool is Lightspeed Insight, and it's all of the information about what apps are being used and who's using them and how often they're used. And really, it was for the last many years the data that helped inform districts about those decisions and look at their applications and make sure they're compliant and meeting all the needs. But it has really hit this new level of interest because of screen time specifically. So I think there's an opportunity to take that data and go into board meetings, go back to communities and have a statement along the lines of we share your concerns about screen time. That is why we use filtering and classroom management
Mhm.
and YouTube blocking to make sure we're focused on the right instructional uses of educational technology. And here, let's look at the data and let's figure out if this feels right for our community. Back to your point of is 25 minutes right? Is 45? Let's look at the data and talk about, use that as the starting point to have a conversation about what seems right in this environment.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I want you to predict the future then.
Okay.
What do you think in, I don't know, 2, 3 years from now, what do you think K-12 is gonna look like with technology, with the screen? Do you think we're gonna be I mean, do you think these laws are gonna pass nationwide, and we're really gonna be restricting and having a heavy pay attention? I mean, are we gonna turn off screens after it hits the 26 minute? What do you think the world's gonna look like in a K-12 classroom with screen time in 3 years?
I mean, I think that it's hard to predict things in this environment, but I'm going to take a shot.
I love it.
Okay, so Iowa has already passed legislation with specific quotas for K-5 on their screen time. But most states, what we are seeing is where I think the trend will largely go, which is legislation gets introduced with quotas. But by the time it passes, it is guidance to look at data, set reasonable limits, think about what the right balance is, and create guidelines within a school around that. And I think that's probably the right direction. I certainly can't look 7 years ahead in my work life and picture it not very, very, very centered around technology. So to
Mhm.
expect our students to graduate ready for college and careers and not be immersed in technology and using it, learning to use it in really balanced ways and learning to have those self controls to know when too much screen time is too much screen time. I think that would be the mistake if we let the pendulum swing too far, that we're not preparing students for the world that they're stepping out of K 12 into. And AI is a really great example of that too, right? We need to be teaching them how to use it safely and how to protect their data and how to judge its accuracy. We need to be teaching them all those skills so that they are using it effectively when they're entering a workforce that really expects AI skills.
This is making me feel, old, but the way back when, way before the year 2020, I would do this, talk with faculty staff and talk about, to have 2020 vision, and how our kids in elementary and middle school that, when they graduate, all these jobs that don't exist yet, that's what they're gonna be in, and to keep your 2020 vision on and that kinda spiel. Well, obviously, we're 2026 and those kids have long graduated, but that's the interesting spot that we're in. Um, it's almost like there's this shift in preparing kids not for the future, because you and I can talk for a long time about what the workforce is looking like, and that AI train that's coming, that's already hitting the workforce. But then there's this weird resistance thing and this shift in K-12 and in college, to lessen technology, um, which is not what's happening on the other side. Like when
Right.
we get to the other side, that's not what's happening. So it's almost like we're not wearing our proper glasses to see what we're supposed to be preparing kids for. Um, and and this is me ranting, but I think it's like cool and trendy to say let's reduce screen time and technology's bad. And is that why lawmakers are suddenly wanting these things to float through? I'm all for the law, the bill that says local school district decide, because that lets the local school district, use some common sense and do what it needs to do. I can take some of that stuff, but yeah, we're in interesting times with that.
It really is. And you see funding and an emphasis on CTE and AI coming from a federal level. Like that is use technology, prepare, prepare. And then you want to ban screens or you want to severely limit screens. I think the answer in most things is somewhere in the middle. And
Yes.
it's, let's recognize there's a lot of gray area in good screen time, bad screen time, appropriate screen time, whatever that is. Let's look at the data. Let's make reasonable decisions and let's create probably more transparency. I think that N a lot of parents just do not know how much time their students are on screens in a school day and what that screen time is comprised of, all of those things. So, the other thing we're seeing as a legislative trend is parent visibility,
Mhm.
and that probably makes sense, and it will probably ease some of these concerns.
Yeah, yeah, if you're a mom or dad or a guardian and you can literally look easy and see what your kid is up to in school, with what they're doing with the screen, yeah, for sure that's gonna ease some of these concerns that are out there. So I guess, and this is probably last question then, Amy, if I'm listening to this, if I'm in a tech director or CIO spot, what should I be doing to prepare, for future mandates on screen time?
I would say almost forget about the mandates, prepare for the conversations that need to happen whether there are mandates or not, just to create more transparency and more balance in your schools. So have the data, know what screen time looks like. Make sure that you're doing the appropriate things in vetting your apps and setting those limits. And then communicate with your communities and your school boards and your parents about that so that we're closing that gap between perception and reality. And we're recognizing that technology addiction in our kids is not good, but here's where we're at and what should we be doing that's different. So having those conversations that are based on facts instead of feelings.
Love it. Well, Amy, thank you so much. Again, Amy Bennett, Chief of Staff at Lightspeed Systems. Check out lightspeedsystems.com. You guys had that Signal product. That's good stuff for tracking devices. And then this is Insight, correct?
That's
To look
right. And
at
if you go to our
analytics.
website, you can find a free screen time audit that will give you this data for 14 days. So you don't have to buy our product, you don't have to do any of that, but you can start having those conversations based on the facts in your district.
Awesome. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you, Chris.